Almost everything that ever happened to your species is gone. Not hidden, not filed away in some archive waiting to be opened, gone. Rotted into soil, drowned under 200 feet of seawater, burned, scattered, eaten by insects until there was nothing left for anyone to find. Roughly 117 billion human beings have been born since your species appeared. That is the running estimate from the Population Reference Bureau, and it is the closest thing anyone has to a head count of everyone who has ever lived. Of those 117 billion people, the number who left behind a fossil you could actually hold in your hand is so small it barely registers as a rounding error. So where did everyone else go? You were taught history as a line, a tidy sequence of stone tools, then farming, then cities, then writing, then everything you recognize. That line feels complete because it is the only line you have ever been shown. But it is not a line. It is a handful of dots with enormous darkness between them.
And the darkness is not empty, it is full. Start with the simplest problem, the problem of rot. Almost everything early humans ever made was organic: wood, bark, plant fiber, animal hide, sinew, grass, feathers, resin, all of it biodegradable. All of it gone within decades of being dropped unless something extraordinary happened to preserve it. What survives is stone. Stone survives because stone does not care. So the entire first chapter of your history is named after the one material that happens not to decay: the Stone Age. Named, in other words, for a preservation accident. Think about what that does to the story. In the 1990s, a German archaeologist named Hartmut Thema was excavating an open-pit coal mine near the town of Schöningen. Waterlogged sediment there had sealed off oxygen for hundreds of thousands of years, and without oxygen, wood does not rot. What his team pulled out of that mud were spears. Complete throwing spears, carved from spruce, balanced at the front like a modern javelin. Roughly 300,000 years old. Before Schöningen, the standard view was that humans that ancient were scavengers, opportunists, creatures picking at carcasses other predators had abandoned. After Schöningen, that view collapsed. These were engineered weapons made by people who understood aerodynamics well enough to move the center of mass forward. Now sit with the uncomfortable part. Those spears survived because of a coal mine and a swamp. Change one detail of that geology and they never existed as far as you would ever know. How many other technologies never got a swamp? It gets worse, or better, depending on how you feel about being wrong. In 2023, a team led by Larry Barham at the University of Liverpool published something found at Kalambo Falls in Zambia. 2 logs, deliberately notched and fitted together at right angles, shaped with stone tools. Some kind of platform or structure.
The date on that wood came back at roughly 476,000 years. That is older than your species. Somebody who was not quite you was doing carpentry. For nearly 500,000 years, that piece of information simply did not exist. Not because nobody thought of it, because wood rots. So here is your first missing part, not a missing event, a missing category, an entire technological world made of soft materials that decayed, leaving behind only the stone, only the hard edges, only the parts that could not tell you what people were actually like. Now the second problem, the problem of ghosts. In 2008, in a cave in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, someone found a fragment of a finger bone, a pinky tip from a young girl. Nothing about it looked remarkable. It sat in a lab for 2 years, then a team at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, led by the geneticist Svante Pääbo, sequenced the DNA inside it.
The result did not match modern humans. It did not match Neanderthals either.
It was a third kind of human, a branch of your family that had lived, spread, hunted, raised children, and vanished, and nobody on Earth had ever suspected they existed. They are called Denisovans, after the cave, And here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. There is still almost no Denisovan skeleton. A finger, a few teeth, a jawbone from a high plateau in Tibet, a skull fragment. That is close to the entire physical record of an entire population of human beings who occupied Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. You know they existed mostly because they are inside you. If your ancestry traces to Southeast Asia, Melanesia, or Australia, a measurable percentage of your genome came from them. They are not extinct in the way a fossil is extinct. They are extinct in the way a language is extinct, still leaving loanwords in the mouths of everyone who never learned it.
And they were not alone in that cave. In 2018, a researcher named Vivian Sloan published the genome of another fragment from the same site, a bone chip belonging to a teenage girl who lived around 90,000 years ago. Her mother was Neanderthal, her father was Denisovan, first generation, two different kinds of human, and their daughter found by chance in one cave in one drawer. How likely is it that the only such person who ever lived is the one whose bones somebody happened to pick up? Geneticists now do something stranger still. They find ancestry in living people that does not match any known fossil at all. In 2020, Arun Durvasula and Sriram Sankararaman published evidence that populations in West Africa carry DNA from an archaic human group that has never been found. No bones, no cave, no name. In the literature, it is simply called a ghost population. There are whole peoples in your family tree who exist only as a statistical shadow. So let us reconstruct one afternoon that no one will ever excavate. It is roughly 20,000 years ago. You are standing on a wide, grassy plain with slow rivers braiding across it. There are hazel thickets, reed beds, herds moving in the middle distance. There is a camp. Woven fish traps set in the shallows, hide tents, a fire, someone repairing a net, children throwing things at each other in the reeds. That plain is the North Sea. At the peak of the last ice age, so much water was locked into glaciers that global sea level sat roughly 120 meters lower than it does today. Britain was not an island. The land between it and the Netherlands was open, rich, well-watered, and full of people. Archaeologists call it Doggerland, and Vince Gaffney and his colleagues at the University of Bradford have spent years reconstructing its rivers and hills from oil industry seismic surveys, mapping a drowned country from sound waves bounced off the seabed. Then the ice melted, and the sea came in, and it kept coming for thousands of years, and it swallowed all of it. Now widen that out. Coastlines are where humans concentrate. Freshwater meets protein, shellfish beds, estuaries, easy travel. It has always been the best real estate on the planet, and for the entire span of the last ice age, the best real estate on the planet is now 60, 90, 120 meters underwater and kilometers offshore. Which means the places your ancestors most likely lived are precisely the places archaeologists cannot dig. Is it starting to feel less like history has gaps and more like you have been reading the margins? Here is the twist, and it is the part that reorganizes everything. The missing pieces are not missing at random. If the losses were random, you could correct for them, assume the sample is representative, scale it up, and carry on. But the record is filtered by a set of rules, and those rules all point the same direction. Hard things survive. Soft things do not. Dry caves survive. Open river camps do not. Highlands survive. Coastlines drown. Recent survives. Ancient does not. Big permanent structures survive. Temporary ones vanish completely. Run every trace of human existence through that filter and look at what comes out the other side. Stone, bone, pottery, monuments, permanence, settlement. Which is exactly the story you were told. That humans were crude, then became sophisticated. That real history begins with farming and cities and writing. But that is not a discovery about people. That is a description of the filter. Consider Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, the site excavated by Klaus Schmidt from 1995 onward.
Massive carved limestone pillars, arranged in rings, raised around 11,500 years ago by people who had not adopted farming and did not live in a city. It was not supposed to be possible.
Ground-penetrating surveys suggest most of the site is still buried, unexcavated, sitting under the hill. Or Blombos Cave in South Africa, where Christopher Henshelwood's team found a piece of stone with a deliberate crosshatch pattern drawn in red ochre, made roughly 73,000 years ago. Someone drew that. Anyone who drew that had drawn 1,000 things before it, on skin and bark and sand, none of which lasted a season. The sophistication was always there. What changed was not human capability. What changed was the survival rate of the evidence. And it is not only the deep past. The Indus Valley civilization built cities with drainage systems while Egypt was building pyramids, and left behind thousands of short inscriptions in a script that, despite a century of effort by scholars including Asko Parpala, no one can read. An entire literate civilization is sitting right there, fully excavated, and it is still silent. So bring it forward, all the way forward, to you. Think about what your own life will leave behind. Not what you own, what actually happened. The conversation that changed your mind at 2 in the morning, the specific sound of somebody laughing in the next room, what it felt like to be scared of something in 2019. The reasons you made the biggest decision you ever made, none of that is stone. All of it is wood and fiber and breath. What will survive you is the durable stuff. Records, documents, whatever platform outlives its users. A future historian could reconstruct your transactions in enormous detail and know nothing whatsoever about your life. They would have your equivalent of stone tools and none of your spears. That is not a tragedy. It is the ordinary condition of being human, and it has been running for 300,000 years without pause. Every one of those 117 billion people woke up inside a day that felt completely real. They had opinions, they had jokes that worked. They knew the names of the people around them and exactly how they felt about each of them. Almost none of it left a mark, and every single bit of it was as vivid as this morning was to you. Almost everything that ever happened to your species is gone, but it happened.